This is what happens when you don't write a script and then you just have to figure out along the way because I'm answering the questions as I go. Hi, my name is Kaysa. I'm online, and my role here is actually to help you walk through the humanity of which we express in almost anything and everything, mainly in the forms of entertainment and things that we consume. So yes, I'll talk about things with games, I'll talk about things with mythologies, current events, and all of those fun things. But today we're going to be talking about Indika. Now, Indika is a game that I played as a third person story driven sort of game happening in, I believe, it's 19th century Russia, where the religious aspects of the beliefs of the people at that time clash with the harsh realities as well. And it's following this young girl named Indika. Now, Indika is supposed to be a nun in training, but she gets in a lot of trouble and not a lot of people like her. What's her problem? Well, the main thing is that she's traumatized, but no one really cares about mental health when you have religion, right? So Indika, when she was traumatized for something that happened in her past, since she told a lie, it led to someone's death. Now, I really want to define what trauma is first. Trauma is when we experience very stressful, frightening, or distressing events that are difficult to cope with or out of our control. So trauma has a large spectrum, a large scale, which actually just lets me to update my previous understanding of what trauma was. I genuinely did believe that trauma was something that had to be physically inflicted, extreme, something just like out of the ordinary that someone should never have to deal with. But apparently trauma has many different ways to take form. It really just depends on the person, the situation, obviously context. Now, with trauma and the way it plays a role with Indika, there is a lot of emotional trauma that does in fact lead to other things. And the reason why trauma plays a large role in Indika's life is because of the one trauma that did happen, it most likely caused her to have schizophrenia. Now, I'm not saying that the devil isn't narrating her life and challenging her and helping her cope with the various horrible things that she does go through, because she does end up going through physical trauma later. However, in the beginning, the trauma that I believe Indika ends up dealing with leads her on a path to be both trying to overcompensate for what happened, because she did play a role in the death of someone's life, as well as also causing her to then develop schizophrenia. Now, whether it be the devil or not, schizophrenia, or the concept of just not having a sound mind due to a psychological sort of disorder, plays a large role within the humanity of which that we are emulating here. So remember, sometimes things can just be symbolic. So even if it is the devil, it doesn't have to really be the devil. Okay, let's not get into any sort of religious psychosis now. Stick with me here. I'm only going to have you for about 10 minutes or so at the most. When it comes to trauma, there's other things that you need to consider. First off, trauma can be physically felt, and we try to figure out why. Because sometimes, yes, there are physical traumas, like if someone did hurt you or abuse you in some sort of sense, and that is unfortunate, but that is a physical sort of sense. But we need to understand what role the brain actually has. Now, there's a reason why things like laughter is medicine and your mind state does actually play a role into how your health ends up. It's because your brain, more often than not, cannot really tell the difference between reality and fiction. So sometimes really just thinking sad thoughts will lead to feeling sadness, and then your body starts to droop and you may even cry and have a physical reaction. And in the case of trauma, when we feel stressed or threatened, our bodies release hormones called cortisol and adrenaline, and those are there to respond to things of danger and or trauma. So sometimes when the trauma is manifested and or triggered, it will then cause our bodies to then react, because our brain is sending out all these different sorts of hormones. Stress is a hormone that many people deal with. Cortisol just up in our bloodstreams, and that's something that we have to address, because we do live in a world that it seems to be a lot more mentally stressful, and when things are more mentally stressful, it still reacts in the body. So no, it's not enough to just say, well, you haven't been stabbed. because sometimes mentally you've been stabbed and you still get the same general effects. You might not be bleeding out, but you know what I mean when I'm talking about physically and mentally connecting them together. How does then trauma lead to schizophrenia? How does trauma lead to you having a mental disorder? Are you on the bridge or the brink? The bridge or the brink? Are you on the brink of having a psychological disorder? Well, maybe. Just like the Joker, sometimes it may take just a single day. Or, in response to that as well, sometimes you can also admit that you may just be more susceptible to it. Now, there are mental disorders that have a lot more of a genetic reason as to how you can be more susceptible to something. Sometimes it could be a trigger to cause it. Sometimes there is just enough trauma to rewire the brain in a sort of way. And trauma may cause changes in the body and affect neurotransmitters in the brain, increasing the risk of psychotic symptoms or schizophrenia. But on the other hand, childhood trauma may trigger schizophrenia in people susceptible to it, and people may experience symptoms between their late teens and their early 30s. So the thing is that, again, it does depend on the person, but by the end of the day, trauma does have an effect, an influence on psychological disorders, along with other things as well. Sometimes things just manifest a little bit later. Sometimes you don't know that you have something going on with you until later. Maybe you've always had it. Maybe the trauma is just embedded within you. There are even books out there that says the body holds the score, something like that. I don't really remember, but that's not the point here. The point here is trying to get to what these levels of trauma can do to a person. We've gone with trauma. We've established what trauma is and how it can influence us. And please remember, if you think you have a trauma, go to a professional, go on a self journey to the professional. Self-discovery and healing is a genuine thing that you have to do, because we've already said it. The brain is what indicates how you feel throughout your body and your life moving forward. Sometimes people need to understand that they need to separate their brain and their consciousness, which is probably another video I should make. But sometimes the consciousness and the brain are just not on the same level. Even if you are consciously not in a dangerous situation, the brain, from your own imagination, will then respond, because remember, it is still just an organ. It be doing stuff. Yes, because the brain can have neurotransmitters and little bits of electricity and all of that to cause your thoughts. It does not then mean it is not susceptible to those thoughts. Okay? So yes, your consciousness and your brain are two separate things at the same time. It's weird. Sort of meta sort of situation, I guess. Okay, so then what's schizophrenia? If we're going to define everything else, what is schizophrenia? Well, schizophrenia is a serious mental health condition that affects how people think, feel, and behave. And it may result in a mix of hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking and behavior. Hallucinations involve seeing things or hearing voices that aren't observed by others. So what some people do with drugs to induce on purpose, schizophrenia does for absolutely free. However, the caveat is that if you have schizophrenia and it's unregulated and unmanaged, you're always in a state of disordered thinking and hallucinations, supposedly. Now, of course, with everything, please know there's a spectrum. There's the levels of severity. It can vary from person to person. So can we get off this train of people saying like, oh, if you're this one thing, that's all you are, and you are all of it all at the same time in every extreme measure? Please stop. But at the same time, please know that Indika is a character who may be dealing with this sort of schizophrenia because of the trauma that she dealt with. And I had earlier hinted that my belief is that Indika is overcompensating, trying to be a nun and be in a situation where she does good. And I do want to clarify that a little bit more. Now, yes, during this time, she may have had the only option to be a nun. So I fully acknowledge that that may be just what a part of the time is. To give a little bit more backstory, she was supposed to be getting married to someone, which is why the boy got killed, because, they hooked up and they weren't supposed to. They were going to try to run away together and it didn't work out. Indika lied to save herself in front of her, the image and, the trustworthiness she wanted to keep up with her own father. So that resulted in the death of a boy. And then at the same time, I believe her father also had a heart attack and passed away. So becoming a nun may have been Indika's only option during that time period. So I fully acknowledge that. However, it doesn't change the fact that part of the game is trying to get these points. These points that you are told outright in the very beginning mean absolutely nothing. You can get as many points as you want, but it doesn't matter. And I actually do love how towards the end it actually fully ties together. So yes, we're dealing with a person who's had trauma, and then another thing we're dealing with is ostracization. Okay, so we have a child who's being ostracized, and I do believe she is a child. I don't remember if it explicitly says how old she is in the game, but please know that during the time that when she was supposed to be getting married and also being a nun, she is still very young. So it is my understanding, given the time period, that she was probably a teenager when she was supposed to be getting married to someone else. And then she became a nun, and I believe she's around 18 or 19 or so while being a nun. So still pretty much a teenager. We're all still kids until we're about 30. Then that's when we become adults for the first time, okay? It's not when we're 18. It's not when we're 25 when our brain is fully developed. My full opinion is now 30 years old. We just have two parts to our childhood: kid and then teen. Ostracization, the act of excluding someone from society, friendship, conversation, privileges, etc., typically by general and often tacit consent. So the thing with ostracization playing a role in Indika is that every other person in the game pretty much hates her. All the other nuns hate her. The people in the village surrounding the place where nuns go, the nunnery, I don't really remember what the word is, hate her. They treat her like trash. Even in the very beginning of the game, it's immediate dismissal, immediate ignoring, degrading sort of conversations, and I hated it for her. But Indika doesn't lash out. She's actually quite nice, or at least docile is what we're going to put it. Submissive, passive to the whole situation. What starts this whole trip is that she's going to deliver a letter. And in this letter, we find out later is essentially just her being kicked out altogether. The devil even makes fun of her about it. It's pretty crazy. But the ostracization of it all is really another form of trauma, because I just want to layer on the fact that throughout this game, Indika is only experiencing more and more traumas, no matter how hard she tries to do the right thing. And that is the great emphasis that I'm trying to put into understanding the humanity behind Indika. So we're dealing with trauma of which she first got someone killed trying to uphold the image of her being a good daughter, essentially, right? Then she gets schizophrenia because she was most likely being more susceptible to it psychologically, and that is also rejected within the church. So you have one trauma leading to a situation which leads to another trauma, of which she's then essentially sent away to go send this letter to somebody else. And in the letter, it's essentially asking her to not come back entirely. Like, they were just done with her. They kicked her out. So, she was ostracized and then fully ostracized altogether, which is unfortunate. Along this journey, she does meet someone else, of which I'm going to make another video about. And she's able to essentially go on a, journey of self-discovery, like I said. And when getting these points in the game, and she's trying so hard to be a good person, to keep up that image of a good person and doing the good deeds, in the end, I don't want to spoil it, but I will say this: trigger warning for those who may be susceptible for very triggering sort of topics. Please do your research before, if you are interested in playing this game, is what I'll say. Something else traumatizing happens, and in the end, Indika literally has to face the reality that everything essentially is a performance for a lot of different people who say that they're good people, and that she was also then being a part of that performance as well, doing all these good deeds despite how she thought and felt on the inside, because she questioned a lot of different things. She questioned God, she questioned the devil, she questioned people, everything. And in the end, let it be the devil, let it be her trauma induced schizophrenia that essentially concludes that, hey, sometimes things just happen. And no matter the explanations people have about the morality of it all and why it happened, it doesn't actually really matter in the end because it happened. You were hurt because people hurt you. And you hurt somebody. And it also hurt you as well. So the hurt passed along, and you can believe all you want, but God's not going to change what happened. And also, this idea of fearing punishment does also contribute to other people's excuses to hurt you as well. Because that's all this really is that no matter how good the merits were Indika did, she still kept getting hurt. The best time she's ever had essentially was just being herself away from everybody and all these different expectations. So how does this character sort of journey of trauma tie into humanity? Well, I mean, the point is that a lot of us, though dealing with forms of trauma, still try to do our best and never come to the conclusion. Some of us never come to the conclusion that things aren't happening necessarily because of us. Sometimes things just happen to us, things happen in response to us, but what do we gain character-wise from understanding and seeing a journey like this is that people are just people. People hurt each other, people do good to each other, people will try their best and do whatever. And this isn't a whole tangent to say stop believing religion is good and bad and evil. It's not that sort of conversation, so stop it right there. The point of this is to understand that trauma plays a huge role into the domino effect, the snowball effect of our lives and what they can lead to. Sometimes we do things to protect ourselves, and then it leads to potentially a trauma, and how we try to cope with that therefore then indicates and directs what we do next. With Indika herself, she ends up trying to do essentially a lot more to compensate, and in the end ends up overcompensating in her goodwill, despite the fact that that's not her. Now, it doesn't mean that if you feel like you're an asshole or a villain that you should just dive in and really settle be an asshole, only be an asshole or whatever. That's not your destiny. The point is to look at yourself. Actually look at who you are. The world is only going to be a reflection by the end of the day of who you are, a reflection of what you want and what you don't want. Who you are is dependent upon you, and it actually can only be emphasized by those around you. And we need to detach ourselves from this notion that we need other people to validate who we are, because Indika is a great example of real life things that has probably happened to many people, that no matter how good you do, no matter how much you try, no matter what good face and good faith you put out there, people will treat you the way that they want to treat you. Being a good person is something that causes you to be a target. Being a bad person is what causes you to be a good target as well. And trying to measure the worth of your soul and the value of your soul, or just who you are as a person, if you don't believe in souls and all of that stuff, does not therefore then mean you need everyone else's validation. Personal self-validation and healing and understanding and evaluation, it's not just one thing, is very important. And I think the reason why I wanted to do this video first so much is because of that. I spend a lot of my time essentially invalidating myself. And, it doesn't bode well, long story short. But I think I'm going to end it here. That's the character analysis I have. You need some self-validation, and so do I. I mean, I have more of it now. But I'll see you in the next video for the next character analysis. And it's going to be about Ilya. So still Indika, and then I got a lot more fun stuff coming up. So please like, follow, subscribe. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Ostracization. Oh my gosh, is that word hard to say? I've said it too many times.